guys. I'm a minute late. I'm sorry. I was waiting for Whisper Status, Brian. And let's see. Until he jumps in, I'm going to share with you a few items I didn't get a chance to address in my most recent video, the whole 4K decline. How's everyone doing today? I wanted to show you guys when I was talking about the reason why Samsung, many of you mentioned earlier that, hey, Samsung isn't saving a lot of money if they go with an IPS or the ADS panel, right? And the reason why they are saving money is because apparently BOE is giving everyone a sweetheart deal on their panels. Oh, here we go. Here's our buddy Whisper Status. Hey, buddy.
Hold on, I can't hear you. Hold on.
All right. I'll take you out until you can. So anyway, what happens is, just so you guys know, so BOE, and let me pull this up real quick so you guys know what I'm talking about here.
There, my mic's not on.
Right here. You okay?
Yeah, you got me?
Yep, I got you.
All right, got a little bit of feedback, but...
It's all right. I'm using the new binaural microphones today. Let's see.
Okay.
How does it sound to me? People in the audience on YouTube, you guys hear me? Is it different? Is it better? Is it the same? I'm using the new Sonic Presence stereo or binaural microphone. So let me know if it sounds better on your headphones, Brian. There's something different. I don't have to wear that heavy thing over my head. So
I'm wearing the PlayStation headphones.
I saw that. I noticed that. Is that the new PS5 headphones?
Yeah.
Nice.
I'm getting feedback, though.
Are
you getting feedback? Yeah.
I'm not getting feedback. You know, it could be mine. Let me try this 1 second. Let me see if I can change my audio real quick. Okay, is that better? Are you getting feedback?
Let me see. No feedback from me. No, I'm good.
Okay, that was me then. When I put it in stereo, it turns off the echo cancellation. So it was probably sending you feedback because I'm using speakers to monitor right now, and it's right behind me. So, all right, what was I doing earlier? Here we go.
Sorry I'm late, everybody.
No, it's all good, man. Saturday. Enjoy yourself. Take your time. There we go. Okay, so what I wanted to share was that, so this is the ADS pixels from the Q95A and the ADS from the Hisense. From Hisense, we know that it's provided by BOE, right? And a lot of people are saying, wait a minute, IPS is not that much cheaper than VA. Is Samsung really saving money? So recently, they announced that Samsung was getting a whole bunch of OLED panels from BOE for their phones because they were getting a sweetheart deal as long as they buy in volume. BOE was going to give them really good pricing. So instead of buying it from Samsung Display, their own sister company, they bought it from BOE. And then it hit me, wait a minute, but BOE is also producing these ADS panels for Hisense. I am sure that if Samsung bought enough of them, and Samsung sells way more TVs than Hisense does, BOE is like, hey, why don't you buy our IPS/ADS panels? And if you look at the way they set up their pixels, very similar. They're both RGB. They're both that IPS, that new style ADS, and they're very similar in terms of their contrast ratios, right? So I was just kind of comparing. Let me pull this up real quick, because I didn't want to go too deep into it in my video because it ends up just going down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Here we go. All right, so on the left-hand side is last year's H9G. On the right-hand side is the most recent review by a Chinese reviewer. He looked pretty thorough, right? He went into it. He was explaining all the good and bad. So he's not like a promoter or anything like that. He really emphasized the weaknesses of the new Hisense mini LED with this ADS panel. And it looks suspiciously like some of the reviews we're getting out of the QN85A. It gets a lot brighter, but at certain angles, there's a lot of blooming. And so it appears that this new panel that's making the rounds, the ADS panels, is probably coming from BOE. Now, that's my guess. There's no confirmation, and Samsung never confirms what its suppliers are. So as we get more of these TVs out there and you have some engineers pulling it apart, repair people, they will tell us exactly whether these panels are the BOE ones or not. And I just wanted to give you a quick update. So B, the installer, recently did his interview on the QN85A, and his observation was really interesting. Off angle, get this, the QN90A had better off angle color saturation than the ADS IPS panel. He's like, wait a minute. The whole point of IPS is off angle. So this tells me that the QN90A, their extra wide viewing angle technology actually works. I doubt it would be that effective or that good off angle, off axis, if it wasn't for that technology, because VA is what it is. So it seems like Samsung definitely has improved this off angle technology. So that's where we are right now. What are your thoughts about the recent Q85 reviews? You got a chance to catch that?
Well, I didn't see B's review, but I mean, before I start, just for everybody kind of out there listening, it's never our intention to put down anybody's panel or make anybody feel bad if your panel's in this conversation. The conversation that we've been having even off of YouTube has been this fascination with X-wide viewing angle on these new panels that has knocked down the contrast ratio. And though, as you had mentioned, we do have better off-angle, less diminish of color, you are having blooming, and you're hurting the contrast ratio, which is what's really hurting these companies, or at least the image quality overall.
Yep. Well, so this whole IPS versus VA, the Samsung's, if their ultra wide angle is making the VA better off angle, it kind of makes it a moot point to ever go to IPS in terms of if you can pay the premium, you're getting better off axis now. Better than IPS, not as good as OLED, right?
Yeah.
And
and we've talked about this at length with any of these companies, even having less HDMI 2.1 inputs, it has to be a cost that really goes back and helps the company. And if you add that all up, I mean, if they're saving money on any part of it, that's just going to add up and equate to profits. Oh, Michael's in there. What's up, Review the Two?
I know. Oh, and review for the two brought up a really good point. So when I was kind of going through the various user forums, a lot of the users, obviously RTINGS has confirmed the 55-inch is definitely an ADS panel. They don't have the 65, 75, or 85 to confirm, but then we're relying on a lot of the user complaining, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
But no expert, I guess you would have to describe it, a reviewer has not outright said that the 65 and 75 are for sure APS or ADS. The reason why they suspected it is because the 65 and 75 do not have the ultra-wide viewing angle technology, the 85. So they're thinking maybe by default, that just suggests that it isn't. But it doesn't mean that it could just be lacking it to save money, because you don't need ultra-wide viewing angle as much on the smaller size TVs. Are you hearing anything about the 65 and 75-inch being an ADS/IPS panel?
I haven't, but the X-wide viewing angle, what's interesting is you would think you wouldn't need it as much on a smaller panel, but actually the viewing angle on a smaller panel is limited. So having the 49-inch 950H last year, it was the only one in that lineup without the X-wide viewing angle. The problem is it's such a small display. Just
Right.
moving over a few degrees, it would change the image quite a bit. So it's like we always talk about in all technology, it's one good part, one bad part. As far as the panels, what they are, it's way too much math for the consumer, especially when you're changing the materials for different sizes. How are the consumers supposed to know what they're actually buying? And that's the problem with this year, as we mentioned before. is you have a lot of reviewers only reviewing one size, 55
Right.
inches, due to price. Even YouTubers are only purchasing that size. It's affordable. And then you have users getting the displays first. So they're actually the beta testers here. And
Yeah.
it's awful. It's terrible because, I don't know, it's just, we were very frustrated the other day. We talked about this for a while.
Quick, guys, I have not had a chance to get either headphones from PS5 or Series
got
X. I plan to. You have both of them, or just the PS5? What are your
I
thoughts?
got Beans. I have them both. I have the PS5 one. It came in the bundle. I do like it quite a bit. I got the Xbox ones the other day. Brass Tacks, who is another YouTuber, was telling me, you got to get them. You got to get them. I finally found them. I tell you, it was like Beans. It was like finding the consoles all over again. They're good. They're very loud. The Xbox ones, they're bassy. They're not Atmos, though. It's not like they give you that Atmos feeling, but they are very good, especially for the money.
So, and I was going to say, it all comes down to, for the money, is it worth $99?
For the money.
Yeah, because you could only do better for $99, right? I mean, it comes down to, you could always do better for $500, but for $99, that's not bad at all.
Yeah, exactly.
So real quick, just get some of these questions out of the way for you guys. LG G1, full bandwidth or not? Robert cannot confirm until he gets the actual specs from LG, and even if he does, he's not allowed to share them yet. So it's still a mystery. Any rumors or word out to you, Brian?
I mean, I don't know why they would change it. To be honest, I don't think LG cares. I don't think we should care. To be honest, what I will say, as we segue a little bit into this, it is so funny how between last year, the C1 or C10, CX, whatever, was knocked so hard. It started out the gate basically crippled because of this news. And it ends up being the most overall equipped display by a lot. And
the best gaming display, absolutely.
And it's happening again with the G1, which isn't even out yet. It's already terrible. Don't buy it. It's a waste. And it's going to be a sleeper. I'm telling you.
So you know what? Let's address that whole 40 gigabits per second. Just what is it used for, so forth? Okay, so, and LG has stated this. For me, the issue is not so much it's 40 versus 48. It was the implication that it was 48 and they never said it's 40. That was it. Yeah. I did not question that it would jeopardize the performance in any way. Now, let's talk about the actual performance. So if you're running 4K 120 with HDR, 40 gigabits per second should cover that. Now, the exception is if you go to 48 gigabits, I think you can then go to 4K 120 444. And then it pushes it. But 444, that's like PC gaming.
And I've even done that.
I don't even know.
So it doesn't matter. But then what's interesting is the argument the other way, where the Sony has the 48 gigabytes per second, but doesn't have the room for Dolby Vision. So there goes 4K. Do you follow me? So it's just interesting how we focus on certain numbers and we become, and I deal with it all the time in the comments where people will throw at me a certain number. Right now, it's 1,400 nits is what I hear constantly. And last year, it was HDMI 2.1. The meantime, the whole year, I'm enjoying 4K 120. I'm playing variable refresh rate. So I'm just saying, like, getting stuck on these little details and not seeing what's on screen has always been the challenge.
And Steven Switch asks, TCL OD Zero 6555, what we're hearing is no. They're not going to release it until end of third quarter this year, and that's an 85-inch. And the reason is, if it is true that the OD Zero is just a QN900A, where Samsung uses their own processor and TCL uses theirs, TCL is giving Samsung a chance to make money on that before they come out with a very discounted 85-inch. And then at that point, Samsung can then discount it, but TCL will not release the 65 or 55 this year, only because it completely jeopardizes the value proposition of anything that Samsung has once people realize that it essentially is so similar, right? We're talking on the 85-inch, almost 2,000 dimming zones, if not just over 2,000 dimming zones, the same number of mini LEDs, the same OD Zero type technology. Everything is so similar that the conclusion is, and the word on the street is, it's essentially the same panel that Samsung has sourced for their QN900A. So those of you, and this goes to one of the questions out there. What is it you guys wanted? Whether if you're in the market for an 8K, so let me find this question here. QN900A. It technically, to me, is the best. Well, you know what? I shouldn't say anything. I haven't seen it yet. You tell me. Did you see it at Roberts at Valley Electronics? I mean, I can only go by the specs, but I can't say personally that it's going to be awesome.
So I saw it out of the box. I got to give a shout out to Michael Wyckoff, who is
Hey, Michael.
who never. He says we don't answer him. I don't really see the comments. Michael, he had a good question about TCL, and it's a good question about are we willing to consider TCL a premium product at this point. We'll get into that, Michael, but I wanted to say what's up. That way you know I can see you. The 900A was very impressive in terms of its brightness, its pop, but I was more transfixed by its design, if that makes sense. Now, you got to remember, when I see these panels, I'm next to a Z9, a ZX, A9G, a A90J. It's surrounded by OLEDs. So in comparison, the 900A had a flat look to it, even though it was vibrant. And that's what, FOMO and I were talking about was I don't know what the contrast ratio is. Now, it's not calibrated, so I couldn't really share much of what I thought other than it was exceedingly bright. But it just didn't have the dimensionality that we look for with high peak brightness. And what this video a lot is going to be about is the contrast ratio. I am not sure what it is. And we've seen over the years contrast ratio dissipating, which has made LEDs look extremely flat. So yes, it's impressive, but I have to wait and see how it's calibrated to really give you my full thoughts on it. But I thought it was lacking in dimensionality, which it shouldn't at that size and at that level. That makes sense.
So that makes a lot of sense. And and it's unfair because you're comparing it to OLED, right? When you compare it to OLED, so this is something that Brian and I always talk about. The contrast ratio or the native contrast, whether it's on or off, is so important. It depends on your lighting situation. If you get to perfect blacks, but your room is bright, you've just lost some of that contrast power of the OLED. But then in a bright room, in a brighter QLED that looked flat to you, Brian, if it was in a brighter room, suddenly it might look deeper because the ambient light neutralizes some of that. So how bright was the room you were in at Valley Electronics?
It wasn't as bright as it typically is. But what I'll say to you also, and a lot of you guys in the comments, I'm sure if you just tune in, we're going to sound very OLED focused. And I will tell you, I am an LED guy. And
Yes,
when I talk about contrast ratio and inky blacks, the Z9D, the 940E, the Q9FN, the Q8FN, didn't matter what room you were in, the blacks were inky. Blooming was minimal, and I haven't seen that again. And I do feel the contrast ratio being diminished with the Z9F, even the Z9G, and all the rest of the Samsung lineup. Even the 900 TS from last year, the TCL R635 had a better contrast ratio.
Yeah.
And so I know we're going to go all over the place, but I feel like the mini LED promise has just brought around the same problems we were having with really dull LEDs and not giving us the dimensionality we all expected. It doesn't matter what room we're in, those LEDs killed it. Z9D, Q9FN, you could be in a dark room. They were amazing, and I just haven't seen that again.
Agreed. Now, there was one comment about 8K where why get an 8K TV if there's no 8K content? And I know a lot of reviewers don't address that. They only go on, well, if there's no content, why are you getting 8K? But we have to understand from the point of view of the TV makers, what they're saying, whether or not it's true is a whole other matter, but what they're saying is, forget 8K content. We will make your 4K content look better when you upscale 8K to 4K because it's sharper, blah, blah, blah. The position LG, Samsung, and Sony is taking when they're selling you an 8K TV, and this is your TCL with their TCL 6 series, is 4K looks better when upscaled to 8K. Now, Is that true? We will know this year because we will have 8K and 4K head to head using a 4K source. But that is the theory. Now, do you agree with that, Brian? That's the question.
No, I watch it every day. I have a Q900R upstairs.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah,
their
there you go.
flagship. It's their flagship, and um, I will say in gaming, as that is native 8K, yes, there is a substantial difference because it's that much cleaner. So, yes, in theory, that would easily be a reason if we were all gaming. The lines are very clean, especially at a large size. You're getting that monitor feel. In terms of streaming and 2K upscales, it is a far noisier image. By trying to add in the AI pixels, trying to fill that image, sometimes the grain structure of older films actually sparkles.
You know, so
So,
this is I want to talk about this. So this is a really good point because if any of you saw my Columbia Classics review last year, I specifically watched it on both the Sony A9G and the Samsung Q900 TS, and I noticed that on the Sony A9G, the noise was greater, and on the Q900 TS, whatever the processing is, the 8K managed the noise a little bit better. And so there was
did it?
less grain, right? The green was smoother. Now, it wasn't in all the class. Some of just looked the same. Like, what was the other one? So Lawrence of Arabia, it really helped for me. But then I'm watching an even older movie, Mr. Something Goes to Washington, right? With Jimmy Stewart. In the
Oh my
black and
God.
white, right? It looked
I was
great.
the HDR in that one.
Oh my gosh. It wasn't really HDR, but it popped. It was more HDR than you would expect, but it's obviously not real HDR. But it looked good on both TVs. But on Lawrence of Arabia, I could not get how much of the grain disappeared. So I did a review on that, so you guys can look it up. But you'll see the difference. And I zoomed in. I go, wow, there is less grain, right? And Gandhi as well. So in Gandhi, the grain was a little bit better. You have to zoom in to see it, but definitely in Lawrence of Arabia, because it's an older movie, the grain was terrible or terribly visible. Some people like grain, so I'm not going to judge. But
Yeah.
on the 900 TS, their upscaling worked for that purpose. And if you like grain, though, then it's lost grain. And I watched Jaws as well. And in Jaws, the grain was the same on the A9G as well as with the 900 TS. So, it's not always the same.
Yeah,
Now,
it's
let's see.
definitely different. But I would
Beans
say,
Gamers.
what's that?
What's that? Beans Gamers is asking Samsung 8K QN 800A or 900A or 4K QN90A. How big is your TV, Beans? If you're getting a 65-inch, I wouldn't get the Q900A. If you're getting an 85-inch, well, Brian has mentioned that you notice it's a little softer if it's 4K at that size, Brian, and you're sitting a bit close. What are your thoughts since you've seen these TVs,
I
larger
mean,
TVs?
judging by what Samsung has done in the last few years, I would go right to the top, especially since a lot of this conversation is going to be about them moving on to 8K. I think the Q900A is going to be far and away better than everything else. It seems like everything's pushed to their flagship. Um, it was impressive. It just had a flat look to it, and there was some blooming. So that's what we're going to get into that as well. A little bit more than I had seen on the Z8H from years prior, from last
Right.
year. But I also, and this is going to sound like a terrible cop out, but this is the world we're living in. These TVs do need firmware updates. And the fact that the Q900A that I was looking at wasn't officially available yet, wasn't released at the time, it didn't take any real updates. So it's probably going to get an adjustment, which is something that we should not ever rely on. But those of you that
Mhm.
have these panels, if you have excessive blooming or you're having issues, you're going to have to ride it out for a little while to see if a firmware update repairs it, which is very dicey because your window is only so large.
Yeah. At C10 versus B10, B10 is slightly dimmer, so watch in a dark room. B10 is not good in a brighter room. Spectacle highlights will be a touch dimmer than the C10, and you only have two HDMI 2.1 ports, so if you need all four, get the C10. Otherwise, it's as good of a gaming TV as the C10. From what I've seen and heard, I don't have it personally, but everyone who's reviewed it, that's really the only complaint. Have you seen got a chance to see the B10?
They're awesome. The B10's great. The problem the B10 has and what it's going to have with our next year's or this year coming up is they're going to be so close in price that if it's only $100 apart, which they've been $100 or $200 apart, you might as well go with the CX. But if the BX is all you, or B10 is all you can afford, it's excellent.
Thank you, Delon, for that. Is the LG C1 the new C10? It is definitely the successor to the C10. It may end up being identical to the C10. So if you don't care about WebOS 6.0 and you don't care about the game optimization dashboard, because essentially it appears to me that the C1 and the C10 are going to have nearly identical, indistinguishable image quality. The G1 is the true update, right? You're getting improvements, visible improvements. I have heard nothing about the C1 that leads me to believe that it's getting any physical update other than the new processor, but the processors are so good now. I don't know if that makes a difference.
Yeah, and Delon, I mean, if you, again, they're going to be so close in price, you might as well buy whatever one you feel at the time you might want, and check out some videos on YouTube of the new operating system and try to gauge which one you'll like better. I haven't been able to experience it yet. The new gaming features, and I have to touch on Samsung's gaming features real quick as well, but the new gaming bar, though the CX has just been updated to add a little bit of that with shadow detail adjustment on the CX, it's been updated. So there is a little bit of that. Just along whatever one you feel is, I would spend a couple $100 for the new one just to have the newer panel. But if not, it all depends on the value you're looking for.
And this segues into this year's TVs, right? So we're going to jump into 2021 TVs, and the reason I'm going to give no face answer this question is because I haven't seen the QNED99 personally, although I have concerns that it is an IPS panel. However, Brian may have expectations that is surprising to me. So Brian, the LG QNED99 8K TV comes only in a 75 or 85 inch size. What is your understanding or expectation of this TV?
Well, last year's Nano Cell, this is where I'm drawing my expectations from. We have all talked about this as far as the Nano's marketing was very much like mini-LED. It was going to offer peak brightness and OLED blacks. It never really came to fruition. I always felt like it was a feeder to OLEDs. But the exception is last year's 8K. Their Nano Cell is stunning. I mean, it's very saturated. It hung in there, as far as I'm concerned, even with the newer 8K 900A, not updated. But the fact that it didn't get blown out of the water and that it also hung in with the rest of the OLEDs in the room being IPS was fascinating. So I'm hoping, I've been wrong a lot already this year. I'm hoping that that technology, or at least that look, is going to go into the mini LED line, because if you had asked me if it was an IPS, I probably would have guessed incorrectly, which is praise. So that's why I'm thinking that the QNED line might be a sleeper this year. So that's just only going off what I've seen on the Nano Cell. I really can't speculate other than that. I'll see one as soon as they launch, but I'm hopeful.
And what I can tell you guys, Robert, his personal inside source, he had a chance to look at these TVs, and he's telling me that he expects the QNED99 to be better than the QN900A. Now, he hasn't done them head-to-head, but based on his informal, just looking at it, he expects the QNED99 to be a sleeper, a great-looking TV. But again, we'll see, right? Because it's so big. I wish it came in a 65 inch, just because it could be a good TV for that. And speaking of 2021, there is no B1 this year. In Europe, there might be. So I know Germany announced the B1 pricing. The US, LG announced their pricing. It's only the A series, the C series, and the G series. Now, this may disappoint some people. So let's talk about disappointments in 2021. We've been talking all week about the surprises, and for me, the biggest surprise is Samsung has historically been promoting its VA panel. Like, hey, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. It gives us the deep blacks, and they seem to have turned the corner on making the VA panel almost OLED-like with the Q9FN and the Q8FN in 2018, and we talked about how impressed we were that year with those two TVs, but it appears that nothing's improved since then. What are your thoughts about how TVs have improved since 2018 till today? Where are we going, and where are we ending up with 4K?
So our speculation going into this year, and you and I spoke about this last night, was I was completely wrong. I thought that OLEDs had really hit a wall since the C8. Other than what Panasonic was doing with their heatsink technology, which obviously you see with the A90 this year, OLEDs were very samey, which is why they're kind of interchangeable. Just depends which manufacturer you like. LEDs, on the other hand, were poised with the Z9D and the Q9FN. We were looking for 4,000 nits, more dimming zones. Vizio Quantum XP series teased that, and we all thought that's what we would get. And it's been going steadily the other way, to the point where even QLED panels have very little saturation. They look like IPS panels. And I think a lot of that, as we spoke about, was this fascination with being thin and being this wide angle that I don't know who really wants it.
Hey, talk about what you're talking earlier. Was it a focus group from Sony?
So we were talking, Robert had talked, and for those of you that don't know, Robert Zahn is from Value Electronics. He's not just somebody who owns the store. He does have input with these engineers from Sony specifically. And he did ask when the Z9G launched, which for many of you, the Z9G is this legendary panel, and it is stunning. Don't get me wrong, it's beautiful. He was concerned about the contrast ratio and did ask why they felt the need to put the X-wide viewing angle filter on a panel that was 85 inches. And they said, focus groups. That's what people were concerned about. And if you think about it, you know, we are the minority, those of us that are even in this chat. Most people that walk into a store, they're looking at the bezel, which is why Samsung is killing it with their bezel-less design. But most people, again, we're the minority, do focus on that. And I guess wide viewing angle is something people really want. And it's crippling LEDs to the point, guys, I would not buy one. I'm at OLED by default. Is where I am at. I wanted the Q9FN, and I was hoping to just wait for it to continue to improve. I had an opportunity to get the Z9G. I could not believe that blooming was still present. So I'm waiting like you guys for the mini LED. I liked what I saw from TCL last year, but it was such a good value. But the fact that blooming is even more present than it was with LEDs, I don't really see the point in mini LED other than marketing.
And when you say the TV by committee, right? So they have focus groups, and I made fun of the Aztec, right?
Freaking
and the theory of the Aztec was originally it was actually pretty impressive in their mind, but once they got through all the committees, the accountants, and I want this, I want that, ended up being the loser car of what, the 80s or the early 90s when it came out, and it was just that's what happens when you design by committee. So I don't know how Sony's focus group went. Maybe we are in an echo chamber because we know what we want, right? We want the best picture quality possible, and we're willing to walk away from a slightly thinner bezel and maybe a wide viewing angle because we sit in front of the TV. But the people sitting on the sides have been complaining to Sony. I don't think I ever remember my family complaining, hey, I'm on the side of the couch and the TV looks dimmer. I notice it because this is what we do, but I don't think anyone ever complained. So I'm thinking this. If you have a focus group and they ask the focus group, hey, would you like a wider viewing angle? This is what happens. Like, yeah, that's great.
Sure, let's do it.
But they don't tell you the compromise. Oh, by the way, I'm going to take down your total contrast ratio by 15%.
Yeah.
You don't give them that choice. You haven't given them, okay, well, if we do this, now when you look in front, it looks a little bit more washed out. Are you okay with that? So the problem with focus groups are, how do you design a focus group? Because like statistics, you can design a focus group to take you in any direction you want, right? And I mean, this is why we have TVs with these giant, $500 speaker system in the TV. I'm like, who's asking for these really expensive audio systems?
Yeah.
And someone asked about the new Sony A90J audio system. So Caleb just did a review and he loves it, right? He thinks that new acoustic glass that Sony put out is probably the best out there, short of dedicated speakers.
Or the actuators that it has.
Yeah, he thinks that's the best implementation of the actuator he's seen. So, but you still need a subwoofer. It's volume.
Yeah.
With
well, the Q900A has really cool speakers on the back of it. You can push them in. I mean, if you watch the video where I did it, it's pretty cool. But again, get rid of all that for me and just get rid of blooming. Just make it a monitor. I'll get a Fire Stick. I know that we're, again, I'll keep saying that we're the minority in this, but what they're doing with game mode, and I'll say this, and I can admit this freely. Right now, I'm without my 77-inch. So I have a 55-inch CX in-house, and I have a 55-inch Q900 R. It's the flagship 8K panel. I don't use it. Its game mode is not saturated. There's no depth. It's just, and again, I'm sorry if you have this TV and if you're in the comments, but one should, my point is, I would use it. And if the CX never appears dimmer, it never appears like it's too dim. Right. And that's what's interesting, where every other LEDs from the past would make an OLED look off.
Yeah. And
I'm not seeing that now. I'm seeing where even if one's brighter, it looks like it's washed out. And that's what's really crippling these TVs. It was the plasma LCD argument. Now it's washed out bright versus dimension. And actually the OLEDs look brighter. So from what I've seen.
Takes us to this question. Peter Johnson, thank you so much. My 2009 Samsung has died. He has a bright room, 55 inches. What should he go for? Wait for July. So the A90J is the first to my mind. However, the A90J does not have an anti-glare coating. So be careful if you get the A90J. Only in the brighter scenes, it'll be okay because it gets bright enough. But then in the darker scenes, do you have glare in your bright room? Because it's going to reflect right off those dark scenes. So keep that in mind. So test that out with your TV. Turn it off, and then when you're just watch the TV, is there glare off of it? And how bright is that glare? Because in the dark scenes on the A90J, you're going to get the glare because it was intended to be watched in a darker room. That's why they don't have an anti-glare coating. I'm a big fan of Samsung's anti-glare. And LG's anti-glare is right there, like at number 2. So if you want to go OLED, then you should get the LG G1 because it should have a better anti-glare. If glare is not a problem, 55-inch A90J, man, I'd go for that. And if you're afraid of burn-in, well, 4K Q90A, that's still going to be one of the better TVs you can get this year if you want a 2021 model. What are your thoughts, Peter Johnson?
Peter, that's exactly what he said. Unfortunately, I wish I had more LEDs to throw at you. I don't. I would have to go with the Q90A is the only one at this time that I can really recommend. I haven't seen what the other offerings will be so far, but from Samsung, which is the crime with our conversation, is the 8 series was always the go-to for value and performance. The 8 series was always even the touch of red LCD, the 8 series, like those panels were the go-to for everybody, Q8FN. And now I don't know what they are. We talked about this a few years ago when the Q7FN came out. If you had a problem and took it to Best Buy, they would immediately upgrade you to the Q70R. They were nowhere near the same level. And we're here again with that. So the Q90A's contrast ratio is actually compared to the Q9FN's contrast ratio with local dimming enabled, not natively, which is a whole nother video for us. So I definitely think that the Q90A is a very good panel. I think it's a good display. And I hope they sort out some of the blooming because, and I have to interrupt here too, is that miniLED was supposed to not have blooming off angle either. It was supposed to eliminate blooming altogether, or at least get as close as you can. So keep in mind off angle is also standing above or sitting below. And the Q90A is the one that I would have to recommend if you're going to stay with LEDs.
And I couldn't resist. I have to put this one up because this is right where you were. 77-inch C10 vertical banding. And now you are the proud owner, soon to be, of a 77-inch G1 as your replacement. So he seems to be in the situation, right? We talked about how 77 inches, you're going to see the vertical banding. There's a higher incidence of DSC like that. And what do you recommend? A 77-inch G10, another 77-inch C10, or the 65-inch A90J? And by the way, the A90J, Robert and John has mentioned they've never seen better uniformity across the board than with the A90J, regardless of brand. So that's something to keep in mind. All right, this is your question.
You don't want to go first? I want to hear you go first. I know what I'm going to say. Mine will take me 2 seconds.
I haven't ever had a 77-inch TV. All of my TVs I've had for review and owned personally stopped at 65. So until talking to you, I didn't even realize that when you go higher than 65, the DSC, the vertical banding, becomes an issue. Statistically, you're getting more of it. And so I have to defer to your wisdom. You're telling me that you looked at the G1. Oh, well, first, was it Robert couldn't find a clean C10?
He had a hard time finding a clean CX. Now, you can pay for that service of QC, so they will go through as many as they possibly, can. They'll try and get you a clean panel. I mean, beyond clean. Most people wouldn't notice the banding that, unfortunately, that you're seeing. It seemed like the CX had some issues in the whites. There was a hexagon problem with them. It wasn't eradicated fully. It got better with updates, but it was still visible. But for your question, I cannot recommend ever going down in size. Almost never. I mean, the immersion on 77 inches, I'm 6'3", it is my wingspan. To go down to 65, I'm really struggling going down to 55. So yes, the picture quality is better on the A90J, but I just can't. I would say go with another CX if you can, or wait to see if the C1s are better. The G1 should be close in the price that you paid. Or depending on when you purchase yours. But I as much as I like the A90J, it is not, the disparity is not anywhere near enough to go down in size.
Yeah, and thank you so much, TechMed Rainer Richter, for helping out and answering Peter Johnson's question. I agree with you in terms of the Q95R for 2019. They're still selling that?
Which one is it?
The 2019 Q95R 55-inch, because I love my Q90R from 2019. So in the US, we don't get the 95R. I'm assuming it's very similar to the 90R. I still like it. It's my personal TV at home. In a bright room, my go-to TV. Looks great in a bright room. It works. And if they're still selling it, I'd say go for it.
Just make sure you're protected with a comprehensive return. A lot of times when we get these leftover panels, just make sure that you're paying less for it. So if they're not going to return your money and they want to give you something that is worth the same, you'll find yourself with a much lesser brand or less. So they might be the same price as a lower level TV now. So just be careful. But to me, the Q90R was awesome.
And then, of course, you have people saying, hey, the 90R was great with its 480 dimming zones, but the 90A, it's a better TV, maybe better processing with less zones. So you have options. I haven't had the Q90T, the Q98 this year has more dimming zones than the 90R, even at the 55-inch size, right? We have a lot of reviews out there. People, even though they may criticize it, they still believe the Q90A this year is definitely a jump above both the 90R and, definitely over the 90T. How much better than the 90R, though? I don't know. I'll check it out. I have both the 65-inch 90R at home. I'll have the 90T or the 90A here. And I can't do a head-to-head, but I can get an idea. But I do believe the 90A should be better. You get more dimming zones. It's got to be better.
What I think what's going to be interesting with the Q90A is maybe like the Q90R versus the Q900R, which was a better display, is because the pixel density, you might yield a brighter, more vibrant image. From what I've seen of the Q90A, I think it's awesome. It just unfortunately stands alone in Samsung's 4K lineup as the only one, and it's their flagship. So I think it's excellent. I think if you are having blooming, I think they will end up addressing a lot of it with we saw with TCL address a lot of their issues with their first generation mini LED. I think Samsung will follow that up and help a lot of that. The Q90A is excellent.
And I apologize, Scott. I am scrolling, looking for your super chat, and I was unable to find it. So go ahead. Thank you. Ask your question again. I'll make sure to see it this time around. Oh, what happened? I think during my technical difficulty. And someone mentioned that on this new microphone, maybe the bass is too low. Are you getting that through your headphones? Is the bass kind of shifted or?
It sounds fine to me.
Bass? Sounds fine. Okay. Now, we were talking this week about the decline of 4K TVs. To say decline, I would like to talk about it at the flagship level. What I have to recognize is at the $1,000 price point, they are definitely bringing more value, features, and the image quality isn't necessarily going to be better than the H9G, but you're getting more bang for the buck at $1,000. I think it's going to be difficult for Samsung or Sony to do better than the H9G at under 1,000, but at least they could come close to it. Now, Sony, I didn't address in my video only because I just took it for granted everyone knew. They haven't changed since they stopped using the master backlight series. We were talking about this, right? The 950G is the same as the 950H, and it's going to be the same as the 95J. Only difference is the processing is getting better. But that panel, they are recycling that sucker, man, over and over. Now, rumor has it they have more dimming zones this year, but ultimately, Sony is just not, they don't care about LEDs, right? They're throwing in the XR chip, but like the X90J, it turns out it's going to be exactly the same as the 900H. I mean, the rumors are saying, yeah, there is no more dimming zones, maybe in the 95J, but the 90J will just be better because better processing. So
What's fascinating about Sony though is, again, we killed them for not going mini LED. But I would argue, even though the Z8H was a bit of a step back from the Z9G due to the lack of black, it was still gorgeous. So while they aren't improving a whole lot, they're not going backwards. So I have to commend them. Even if the X95J and then X950H, they were still very good. They have the best looking game mode, in my opinion. Sony, right out of the box. It still was a great serviceable panel. The 950G, the 950H, the 950J I will have in-house. That will be something I'll be able to take home. It was easy to recommend them, where with Samsung's lineup, I really can't. So it's hard to recommend anything under the X90, the higher end one.
And speaking of these value TVs, like the Hisense, the TCL, so this is, if you caught my video earlier this week, well, yesterday, I was talking about what Hisense is releasing in Asia. So this is their Chinese model, the Hisense U7G Pro Mini LED. It is using very similar IPS ADS panel that the Samsung Q95A is using, and you can see their native contrast has dropped significantly compared to last year. So this is from RTINGS review of the H9G. Now, what they noticed though is it got a little bit brighter, but it doesn't push the envelope of what they achieved last year with the H9G. And the reviewer complained that, well, you know what, there's a bit more blooming now. So this is, they're trying to, on the one hand, add mini LED because everyone else is, but it appears that the H9G ended up being maybe apples to apples, the better image quality. And get this TV at 65 inches, if you convert it to US dollars, it's $1,500. So the H9G last year was 900 or just under 1,000, depending on where you get it. This in China, MSRP is 1,500. If you take away all this fancy stuff, right? They have the fancy case, fancy speakers, the fancy camera. Okay, maybe $300 off. It's going to be at least over 1,000. So if they bring something like this to the US, you're getting a IPS panel, you're getting a bit more blooming, worse contrast ratio, because they're going with that, ooh, everyone wants mini LED, we're going to give you mini LED. But I'm also being told that maybe they won't offer this in the US, they will maybe just offer the VA version, which is more expensive than this. So if this is, let's say, 1,300, right, 4K. Now, are you willing to pay $1,600 for a VA version of the mini LED? So Hisense has a problem. They want to go premium, but not too premium. And then you have the dual cell. So that's the second TV that I'm being told Hisense will release in the US, but it only comes in a 75-inch or a larger size. So if you want a dual cell, you might have to make sure you have room. We don't know what the price is, but Hisense Canada has confirmed that they will also be releasing the dual cell. As a matter of fact, they have it in their showroom right now in Canada. They just can't show it off yet until the official launch. But I was on Twitter with Hisense Canada, like, oh my gosh, this is the most amazing TV. I'm like, man, you're just taunting me. But the US is
like, where is it? I can't see it.
Like, where is this? Where is it? Oh, you got to come and see it. It's in our showroom. Like, oh man, you guys. Yeah. Cool.
A little hard to travel now.
Yes,
but
I know.
But it speaks to what we're talking about here. Is we said this in the influencer video that you did, was it's all, I mean, you dig very deep and find articles from all over the world. But for the average person, or even for myself, I have to wait for the reviews to come out, especially like RTINGS, so they do break them down.
Yeah.
And they do reveal things like slow pixel response, things that you may not be able to. Like I had the 940E, and the Z9D had a very slow pixel response, and I could not understand why the motion was making me sick. And I saw in their video, they measured it to be slow. It was just that panel. But it's just hard to wait for those reviews when everything's trickling out. And Hisense and those guys do not care if anybody reviews them. It's a word of mouth thing. It's very challenging for a lot of us that are buying.
And so let's talk about the challenge. We always assume that if it's newer and you're paying more, it must be better. And that's a heuristic, right? So it's a shortcut to decision making. This is what, if you guys read Kahneman, he's an economics professor, and his big thing is people don't like to think. They like to use heuristics. They like to, what is the fastest way to decide without thinking too much? And the fastest way to decide is if it's newer, if it's more expensive, it must be better. And as we saw with the Q185A, even objectively, it's not better. You've lost a couple of things. And then the audio. So I love RTINGS because, man, they review everything. They review the audio quality. You're like, the distortion's worse. I'm like, what? So you're paying more, your audio distortion, it gets louder, but then it adds distortion. So what's the point, right? So when it comes to TVs, don't assume that even if it's the same brand, next year you're paying more, you're getting better. Not necessarily so. They want to make more money, and they could fool you into thinking it, they will.
Well, the case in point is actually the C9 and the CX. The C9, I think they're equal. The CX has a new processor. The C9 was slightly brighter, but the lack of 48 gigabytes per second, though it doesn't matter to me, for people that bought it without looking, were really concerned for about 4 months if they made the wrong call. So these little cost-cutting things that these companies do, as you see with Samsung with the 8 series, is it cripples it. So for many of you that do get caught with a panel that you return, and they immediately say to you, hey, FOMO, I have the new 8 QLED. It's great. And you're like, oh, fantastic. And you get it home and it's an IPS panel. And we're not killing IPS. IPS on monitors is stunning. Its quickness, its latency, but the pixel density on a small monitor is crystal clear. Even if watching a movie, it looks deep. Yeah. Not so on large panels. And that's what a lot of us are talking about. And I know many of you get hung up on peak brightness, but keep this in mind. Peak brightness has not even approached where we thought we'd be. We still are barely cracking 2000. And the contrast ratio was lower. And obviously, the brighter the panel, the contrast ratio being lower, you much rather have a lower brightness on an LED with a higher contrast ratio. So all we're seeing is these. Yeah, so all we're seeing, and it's blooming still. So how do I have weaker?
Yep.
How do I have weaker contrast ratio, a brighter panel, and more blooming? And blooming is very different now. Blooming,
hello, mini-LED. It completely defeated the whole purpose.
Well, but I mean, blooming before used to be around bright objects.
Right.
You're seeing it where on the LG, if you guys want to see a good demo, it's the LG black demo. It's bubbles and an umbrella, and it's easy to find LG Global. It's the bubbles come up. You would see some blooming. It's literally like on every bubble.
Yep.
And it's just, I don't know how, my point is, it makes it like 8K. When I walk into a store, 4K versus 8K, 8K.
Right.
LED, just like Edge Lit LED was marketing. Edge Lit LED was worse than old LCD. People liked it because it made the panel thin. It actually created a less deep image and created clouding on the edges, if you remember. But people were chasing Edge Lit because it sounded cool.
Yep.
And right now, that's mini LED. And many people are here saying micro LED. Wait till micro. Guys, it's just the next thing. In the meantime, OLED has just snuck in and become affordable.
Well, speaking of OLED, did you ever have the Sony X900E?
I still have it.
There you go.
Right in the other room.
For you, buddy. He has the X900E. He wants to upgrade LG OLED, or is there something to this 8K thing?
The X900E was a very rare display. It came out with the 930E, the 940E, and it was also umbrellaed with a Z9D. So that was a killer lineup. The 900E did not have Dolby Vision, and it also was larger than the 930E. It was full array. It does have a very good black level for what it is. And I had the 900E compared to the 950H, and the 950H just edged it out. If you're going to go to an OLED, you will see a noticeable difference, especially in contrast ratio. It's going to be noticeable. You just have to go up in size because the 900E's bezel, if you go 65 to 65, the OLED's going to look noticeably smaller. So if you're asking me to upgrade, I would just make sure you're going up in size.
And I want to talk about the 8K real quick. Not a lot of people realize how much energy an 8K TV has to push out just to get the same level of brightness as a 4K. So if you go on Best Buy, and real quick, the QN900A, right? So the Samsung Q900A, if you look at its 65-inch size, now it's a little bit brighter than the QN90A, but not that much brighter. It has a efficiency rating of $48, right? So check this out. You guys, what's happening with this? It is simply, they have to work so much harder. Okay,
Yeah.
so this is the Q900A. Then you go on and you go, oh wait, that's cool. Well, what about the QN90 at 65 inches? And what you'll see, the significant, how little energy it uses compared to 8K. And the image quality is what, maybe 5% different in terms of peak brightness and whatnot. So here you have the right here and $24. So you're going from 48 to literally
Wow.
twice as much energy. And the peak, it's not brighter, but it has to put out that much energy to make it as good as a 4K. And this is what people don't realize. Man, that's a lot of energy just to make it maybe 5% brighter than what you're getting out of a Q90T. So for the energy conscious, obviously it's a no-brainer. 8K doesn't deliver that level of performance. You're not getting twice of anything out of an 8K for sure. But you're definitely spending twice as much in terms of efficiency. And that's not just the energy. We're talking about everything. The processing has to be faster. They have to control darkroom performance because now you suffer possibly more crushing or worse blooming. It just requires that much more processing to manage 8K. So, oh, here we go. Corey Melvin, thank you. Does VA versus IPS LCD panel technology mean even as much as it used to? Well, if you guys watched Be the Installer, the Calibrator, and now I'm not going to comment on gaming because I think gaming and IPS has its own relationship. But if you're just talking image quality, in the past we always thought IPS would give you a wider viewing angle. And what Be the Installer showed us was, well, no, with the VA plus a very good wide angle technology, you can exceed the IPS wide viewing angle advantage significantly. And I saw this, wow, hey, that answers the question. VA has, assuming you have that wide angle technology, VA with a good wide angle technology, it overcomes IPS's advantage there. Now for gaming, I'm hearing that motion should be better, but I don't have any personal experience with that, so I can't really say. What are your personal experiences with gaming and IPS, Brian?
Well, with IPS, what's interesting is, again, talking about wide viewing angle, yes, the colors remain, but it blooms still. Mm-hmm. So there defeats the purpose of wide viewing angle if I have more blooming off angle. So yes, the colors don't shift, but it still blooms. So I don't really see if you're giving me a wide angle, then I shouldn't see any blooming. And someone in the chat asked about the Z8H real quick to segue into that.
Yeah.
To me, the Z8H is going to be, it's a bargain at $5,000. Keep your eye on it because it's still an awesome LED from Sony. And it's really what the 950H should have been in terms of as good as it is. But just keep in mind that you're buying that TV as a 4K TV. It's not really an 8, you know what I'm saying? Like buy it as a really nice 4K TV that has 8K. You're just not going to get the variable refresh rate or any of those. They're not coming to that panel. So, but keep an eye on it if you like that panel.
And the PC gaming question. You got a Freesync 6800 XT. Congratulations. Hopefully you didn't pay too much to a scalper and got it off of Newegg when they do their shuffle.
It's disgusting.
Oh, I know, it's terrible. So LG C10 or 77-inch C1. So yeah, we talked about this. The C10 or the C1 will be your best option in terms of full compatibility with almost anything gaming, PC, console, whatever. Now, because you're going 77-inch size, just keep in mind, you might have to play the panel lottery. You might have vertical banding. If you're lucky, you don't. That's just something that larger OLEDs or larger TVs tend to have, period. It's just a risk. But other than that, I can't think of a better option for PC gaming than the C series, C10
Yeah,
or
they're
C.
amazing. And even
Yeah.
the banding that we speak on, again, that's something you may or may not be. People don't notice it. I've just unfortunately have a keen eye for that. But as far as what the CX, and that's why the CX versus a lot of the other, the CX versus all the other panels is they've been doing it for 3 years now, which is why you're seeing Panasonic and Sony really struggle to get 4K 120 working without a dynamic resolution. They're really, really struggling to do that. So,
Right.
you know, having forms of VRR, I think when you get into PC gaming, I do think it's going to have to be specific to FreeSync or GSync versus just what consoles are using. That's just my thoughts on it.
And well, it goes to what we talk about. It's always about the use case, right? If you know what your use case is, and you always say this, if your use case is just PS5 gaming, most people who have a Sony, like an X900H or even an X950H, they find gaming on the PS5 absolutely fine, right? They're like, oh, it looks great. What's everyone complaining about? But if your use case is a Series X, you want Dolby Vision because they're announcing possibly titles with Dolby Vision, and you want 4K 120 with Dolby Vision. Sony cannot do that. It's just beyond its technical capabilities. So if you know what your use case is, then we can help you. But if you want, like, I want a TV that does everything, it's not going to happen. No, just darkroom watching, and you're limited to certain TVs. So someone's talking about the Q90A, the review is out, it's 8.6. And the one thing that concerns me only is the 55-inch has a few hundred less dimming zones than the 65. Does that make a difference or not? I don't know. I'm hoping that the 65, 75, and 85 with more dimming zones should have better control. But most important to me is the Q90A improved over the Q90R? As long as it's improved over the Q90R, I'm happy because it's showing progress at the 4K flagship. So it's obviously improved over the Q90T. So a lot of you are saying, well, it's better than Q90T. Does that account for something? The Q90T is a repackaged Q80R. So technically, the 90T to me doesn't count as a flagship. The Q90R is a flagship, and the Q90A is a flagship because both of them pushed the specs and the technical elements beyond the previous, well, beyond what a flagship should be prior. So the 90T was kind of like a disappointment because of that. So I'll have the Q90A hopefully in 2 weeks once Robert ships it out, so we'll be able to compare it against the 900TS. So I have the 65-inch 8K 900TS, which had excellent darkroom screen uniformity, all that good stuff. So it was the only one that matched the H9G for me last year. So I will use that, and we'll see how good it is. And if it's better than 900T, then I think they're moving forward.
Well, and I think
the 90A?
I have not seen it yet, other than seeing some reviews. I will see it at Value Electronics. But what I will say Samsung's also doing that I really don't hear talked about much is they have done the ultra wide. Did you see that? Where they've done what's the aspect ratio for the ultra wide monitors? They have that built into their panel now, where you can actually get that really wide. From the one they have on like the Acer Predators, the ultra wide. They have that aspect to them. I don't know if the Q90A has it. I know the Q900 does, but think about how cool that is to have that feature. If you want it, you'll have large black bars, but to have a wide viewing angle, we can really stretch it out. Ultra wide. It has ultra wide, which is an awesome feature that they don't talk enough about. That Samsung has always led the way with gaming. I just wish that they would offer 2 gaming presets, one for cinema for single player and then one for performance. But they definitely are doing a lot with it.
A80J. So a lot of people believe A80J may have the evil panel. Sony apparently cannot outright say yes or no for whatever reason. I understand they don't. So if you look at the energy specs, and I think Vincent mentioned this, it appears possibly to be the same panel because they're so similar in terms of energy consumption. But until somebody takes out a jeweler's microscope and examines the subpixel, we can't confirm. But let's say, for the sake of argument, if it is the G1 or the Evo panel, Sony traditionally does not like to push their panels bright because they value color accuracy, whereas LG will push it a little bit brighter because they're willing to risk clipping. And I see it on my LG C10. Scenes where the A9G does not clip, the C10 gets brighter, but I lose some of that color detail. And it's fine, there's no right or wrong. Some people don't mind losing a bit of color detail to get that extra pop, but those who are traditionalists, creators intent, they would rather have it slightly dimmer than lose some of that color detail in the sunset. Any word from you about the A80J?
I have, but again, we're talking a lot about the verbiage of what an Evo panel and what's going to show up on screen. From what I understand, what's great about it, it's going to give you basically a larger A8H. Don't expect it to be the G1. And it would be foolish for LG to allow that. We talked about these little deals all these companies make with each other. There's probably a reason Sony can't disclose. It's kind of like Call of Duty, where Sony has that deal with, they have the XP and they have the maps a few weeks early. I do feel there are deals there, and why LG was allowed to do, or LG did an 83-inch C1 and not an 83-inch G1. I think there are some deals there to say, let you do the Master Series at 83. We're going to do the G1. There has to be some of that, guys. I mean, they are supplying them. I think the A80G is going to be the one many of you are going to go for. And I think, and I got to say this too, and this talks about toxicity in YouTube. People are taking things way too personal with what they think we feel about certain panels. We're not here putting down any panels, but what I see so many people doing now is they're getting so caught up in the hundreds of nits that they're ready to trade in their A9Gs and their A8Hs. Don't do that. Yep. The A90's great. I mean, it's awesome. But trust me, don't get that FOMO where you're like wanting to get rid of a panel you just bought. And don't take it. I'm watching the comments now. Don't take it personal. And I think people guarding their panel, we've seen that with graphics cards for years. People get very offended and they protect their panel. No one's saying anything bad about. It's weird with YouTube. If you disagree, or even if I don't say anything, all of a sudden they hate you because their panel they think it's being victimized. We've said in the beginning of our live stream, there is no panel here that we're pushing in a bad way. It's just we're talking about the industry in general. But I'm even seeing people at the A9G saying, Brian, man, what do I do now? Keep your A9G. It's half the price.
I have the A9G. It's been my reference TV to compare all other TVs.
It's fantastic.
For the last 2 years, and my wife won't let me sell it. She's like, no, it's her. She doesn't care about the brighter 900T. She doesn't care about the more saturated popping HDR of the Hisense H9G. All these other TVs, right? And she's like, she still likes the A9G. She doesn't care that it's not brighter, but she just loves the way everything about it. And so the A9G continues to be relevant. And the C10 as well, because C10 is a great gaming OLED. There's no reason to go to G1 if you're enjoying the C10.
It's amazing. But with the A90J, I did a 30-minute deep dive into it being the best panel this year between 4K and 8K. And I had one little excerpt in there where I said, if you have the A8H or the A9G, sit tight because it's still a Sony OLED at heart. And I get killed because they're like, oh, you're saying this TV isn't any good. You're saying, I did not say that. But you have to understand, when I'm spending how many hours with this TV, I'm not showing you movies. We cannot do that for copyright. But as I spent time with the A90J, watching movies, right next to me is an A9G and a Z9 and a ZX. So I have them in front of me versus what people have read or what they've heard. It's beautiful. And we've said many times, all of us, it's a clear step forward. But we talk about value. A Bugatti is not a good value, but it's amazing.
Right,
But I
right.
mean, the A9G still catches my eye, even in that room. So
Yeah.
don't get, and again, we all want you to have the best panel. I'm not selling TVs here. So I'd
Yep.
rather you be happy with what you have. So when people get very, very upset um, about whatever they're taking personal, I want, if you keep your own TV, I'm happy for you. I just want you to be content with, at least that's my aspect of it.
So I love this question with Jimmy Two Shoes because it
Oh,
was something
Jimmy's the man. Jimmy, much
I've been
love, bro.
dealing with. This question is ultra short throw protections, right? Projectors, right? USTs. So on the one hand, I agree with you. It is rapidly growing because they're becoming more affordable and they're incredibly bright, and they're doing the right things. They're emphasizing gaming features, this and that. And if you have the right AR screen, you can watch it, somewhat in the day. And I'm really excited about what Hisense is doing with their trichroma laser. So I don't think we're there yet where it will replace the TV because of the projector selection and setting it up. And for me, that's why I don't have a projector. It's just I have so many TVs. I need to have TVs I can push around, push in and out. But if I only reviewed movies, let's say my job is to review movies, I would choose a projector because it makes it that much easier for the immersion. But I couldn't tell you how good the HDR is because the dynamic range of the best projector still doesn't match the OLED. And for me, I really want to see what did the creators intent for Dolby Vision or like 4,000 nit graded peak brightness. There's no way a projector could come close. So I wouldn't be able to give you an accurate assessment if that was pleasant or not. So for the mass market, I think having that, what Hisense is doing and Epson, right, including the screen with a projector, that is probably going to be the future for that one-stop shop. But you can save some money by just putting it together yourself. I just don't see it reaching most. At some point, it's going to slow down because it just takes too much work. What are your thoughts on projectors?
Well, Jimmy, what's up? I have to give a shout out to Shane from Spirit Change. We know Shane, and
Yeah,
we had a battle on his live stream about projectors because
I,
his
I saw that. Yeah,
we
yeah,
had a battle, and I'm still talking about peak brightness and cleanliness of image, and so we do sit in his home theater, which is off the charts, and everything we're talking about just goes away when you're talking about like $100,000 system. I mean, ridiculous.
yeah.
I will say though, for movie watching, everything looks good. Grainy movies look good on a projector. I even have a cheap projector, and everything looks good. The way the pixel density is on a projector is so much different than a TV.
Mhm.
I do feel, to what Jimmy's point is, they will get there as TVs run out of space. They're not going to keep getting 100-inch TVs. They're impractical as far as uniformity issues, all the problems that we're talking about. Who's going to have 100? They just can't be thin and that large. So I think projectors, to what we're speaking about, they were always too expensive. They're going to sneak in and they're going to be 4K. We're going to be on to 8K for no reason. And the 4K projectors are going to become affordable. So I'm more hopeful that projectors, because I have a cheap projector. It's an Optoma 3D. I love it. It's 200 inches. It's on the wall. It's incredible. And it's $500.
I know I'm going to projector sooner or later. Probably not for the studio to review. Probably for my bedroom or den or whatever. But yeah, I am a huge fan of projector. I mean, there is no right answer. You have a
No.
use case for everything. And I think Marcus Thomas, thank you so much. This question is something that I would have to say that Brian is uniquely suited to answer because when it comes to troubleshooting the A90J or OLEDs in general, this is what you do because you had so many issues returning your various OLEDs or you're looking for. So my answer is quite simple. The reason I buy from Robert at Mel Electronics, and this is not selling Robert, it's just that's what I do personally. He quality controls all of my TVs, and I pay him for that. So it's not like it's a free service. If you buy from him and you get it calibrated and you can get it quality controlled, you can separate the two. You don't have to get it calibrated and quality controlled. You can just say, hey, can you make sure I get a good panel, open it, and break it in for me for 100 hours? I want to make sure it's clean. I don't want to be returning it. Robert will do that. So all the TVs, because for me, it's important. I get a TV that works. I don't have time to return it back and forth. So since I discovered that Robert did that, I always have my TVs, the ones that I need to get. If it's offered by Val Electronics, I have Robert just do the whole thing for me. But it's not cheap, right? So if you're just counting your pennies and you need, like this is it, you have no money left over, then you're going to have to pay the panel lottery. But if you have a little bit extra, call Robert and ask him, hey, how much does it cost to QC this panel? I want to make sure it's a good one. And he'll tell you how much that is. Honestly, I don't know what it is. I think it's like two something, but I always get it calibrated. So talk to Robert about that. Now, when it comes to looking for problems, Brian is your man. What should he be looking for?
Exactly. So, Marcus, what I would do, honestly, especially if you're, what is the best way? If you're a rookie, ignorance is bliss, Marcus. I would try to watch content, all types of content. If you're a gamer, the best way to find banding is to pan in third person or in first person up in the skybox. But what I would do for the first few days is really work the panel hard and just watch as much different kinds of content that you can, be it sports, cable, and don't look too close. Just enjoy it. If nothing leaps out at you and as you get closer to your return window, then you can start deep diving if you want to do slides on YouTube for banding slides. The problem with those slides is they will show you banding at 5% gray that you will not see in content, and then you can't unsee it. So as you mentioned, Marcus, if you're a rookie, I would stay a rookie and just try and enjoy it. If nothing leaps out at you or anybody in your family, she's a keeper. But I wouldn't start hammering it with slides because you'll ruin the experience. That's just my thoughts on it.
I agree. And RP Satalal has a question that I think everyone's asking. Buy now or wait? So I think the good news with the LG C10 is this. Although it is heavily discounted right now, it's going to run out pretty quick by the time Prime Day arrives. So it depends on how much you're willing to wait, because if you miss your window of buying the C10, because everyone buys it up for whatever reason, the C1 will be even slightly cheaper next year because the cost of production for the C1 is even lower than the C10. So the discounts that will follow the C1 will be better than the C10 this time next year. So it's not like, oh my gosh, I didn't get a C10, now what? We'll get the C1, just wait a year. So yeah, if you get the C10 and you push it and you miss your window, then just hold on for the C1 because it's really the same TV in my opinion.
And RB too, and we talked about this the last live stream, FOMO, is that LG is notorious with their inventory. There isn't a lot of them. So the C8, people try to gauge that when they wanted it, even though it didn't have HDMI 2.1, then all of a sudden they were gone. The C9s actually were more expensive than the CX for a while because of the 48 gigabytes debacle. Then they were gone. So my question is, or my response is, if you want something now and you want to get it, to secure it, it might be worth paying exactly what it is. If there's a return window from a place like, say, Costco, and you have 90 days, as we mentioned before, the store will typically refund you the difference. So you'll give yourself a window of 20 days, 30 days, 90 days with Costco. I just wouldn't, and this is just me, I'd rather have it at a couple $100 more expensive just to make sure I can secure it. Now, if we're talking about $500 or $1,000, then it's worth waiting. But I think getting too much into watching these for $50 to $100, you might miss out on a great panel. And we have literally ships stuck in canals all around the world. I'm like, how many TVs are on there? I'm thinking Egypt, Europe.
All the A90Js are on there.
Oh my God. Oh my. So I would.
Containers?
Yeah, but I would say, price watching is a little dicey. If things get close to your budget, I would pull the trigger on them because this year is going to be different than many others. I can't, even with my connections with Robert, I cannot get dates on when things. I would be the first person on YouTube every time, and he can't give them to me because they're not solid. The A90J, I was supposed to be there 3 weeks ago. We would have been the first people on YouTube to even show it, and it got pushed back. And then one day he's like, I have it. So if he can't tell you, there's no way to really. Best Buy surely can't tell you, because I was in Best Buy. None of these TVs are there, other than the A90, which just got there. The Samsung's not even there yet.
This question by Peter Johnson I think is important because a lot of people do put their TV in a bay window or right next to it or right in direct sunlight. So here are two things you have to realize. The enemy of any electronics is heat and UV. UV will break down rubber and plastic so fast, faster than heat. So what I always tell people is avoid direct sunlight. It's not so much the heat. Actually, it's built to handle more heat than that sunlight's going to create. It's that UV that will degrade whatever's inside. If that sunlight reaches inside and it's out there every day after day, UV's going in there, man, not good. Now, the heat doesn't help. So I always tell people avoid direct sunlight on any electronics. It's just not a good thing. And it will degrade your plastic. So if you have a big window, make sure you put the right screen, anti-UV, as many of that ceramic nanoparticle anti-tint on there because it will shorten the life of your TV. Now, as far as the heat, I don't know how hot your room is, but if you have a temperature controlled room, that's okay because that will control the temperature of your TV fine because it'll probably get hotter inside the TV than whatever the sun's bringing to the table. But definitely it's the UV exposure. So I don't recommend putting monitors, computers, any electronics exposed to the sun. Have you had any experience with this?
Not real. I mean, I haven't been in a situation to where in a very hot environment there isn't AC, whether it's TVs in Arizona and California.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I would say just, try to get yourself as much as you can in a climate controlled room. Get some blinds. I have to give one shout out to my buddy Paolo, who is just woke up at 7 a.m. Paolo's country is now in lockdown. So I know a lot of people in the world.
Yeah, a lot of Europe, France as well, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's spiked.
So Paolo, we sending you a lot of love. I know, here we are opening up here. FOMO and we're opening up, and you guys are locking down. So I send my love to you guys. So I just give shout out to Paolo. Much love, Paolo.
So under $1,200, OLED, non-OLED 55-inch. I'm thinking the X90J possibly. And remember that the X90J, although it does 4K 120, VRR continues to be a question mark. And although MSRP of the X90J is $1,400, it'll be under $1,200 in no time for the 55-inch. Just hold on to that. Now you have Samsung options, but I think a $1,200 Samsung really also is kind of overpriced. We have to see how the reviews come out head to head. But if you really want this to be a gaming TV, and it's not just for a Sony PlayStation, you're not going to get VRR with a Sony until it's official. So,
and I think he's saying best non-OLED, right? So
non-OLED, that's the
non-OLED.
thing.
Yeah, I mean that's where the 900H slides in, and I do hope Sony does. You will get 4K 120. You might not get those other features yet. I can't see them canceling them. I know we've talked about it here many times, but that's to me kind of the go-to. And you get Dolby Vision, and you have some of those features, and it's just such an affordable display.
And thank you, Truth. I love that he ran this through his spectrum analyzer and found that these microphones obviously peak in the 125 Hz and 500 Hz. So just so you guys know, I'm using this Sonic Presence binaural microphone, but I did convert it to mono so that the echo cancellation on the StreamYard would work because it was causing feedback for Brian. However, I didn't realize it was peaking at 125 and 500. I normally use the Electro Voice, which is an excellent microphone. I was just trying to play with this. I will go back to the Electro Voice so this doesn't happen next time. And I'm assuming it hasn't happened before. So I apologize for peaking at the 125 Hertz and 500 Hertz.
Wow. You guys really know your stuff, Truth. That's my point to you guys. Wow. That's awesome.
And I have to emphasize this as well. So review for the two. Man, so many good TVs to choose from. So also lost in this discussion is the TVs in 2021 overall are better TVs. You're getting improvements. My biggest complaint is they're at the flagship level. You're not getting better. What is happening is they're trickling down the good stuff to lower and lower price points. But if your budget is $3,000, there's nothing there outside of OLED. So we're talking about the Samsungs and the Sony and the LG non-OLED TVs, Samsung has been holding steady on their flagship performance for a while now in the 4K. And we're hoping the Q90A pushes that a bit, and I hope it does. I'll be getting that. But for everyone else who's in the 2000 range and below, I think you have a lot of great TVs to choose from this year once Hisense and TCL kind of shows off what they can do for below 2000 as well.
And that honestly, guys, has always been where those companies, they can act if they can just get their quality control together, especially Vizio and those guys, they could dominate. Because as we were talking about, yes, there's a lot of TVs to choose from. Right now, Samsung has one, the Q90A at 4K, which we can really recommend at mini LED. Sony will have one at the 95J. So I know it seems like there's a lot of options, but at that top, there's like three. There aren't as many as we actually think, but at the level that we're talking about, FOMO's talking about, yeah, there's plenty. It's just
Right.
Sometimes at the high end, when we talk about what's happening with mini LED, there aren't as many options as you really think there are, at least from the big three. So I'm always hopeful and always championing TCL, Vizio, and Hisense every chance I get.
Quickly, X95J 85-inch. Based on this leak, it looks like $5,000 for the 85-inch X95J. Now, again, these are leaks that was shared on avforums.com. I've linked it before in my community channel, and they've been very close, if not spot on so far. So assuming crazy things don't happen with the supply chain, this is pretty close to what you can expect when they do release. And, well, so yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with the prices you see here. So
Yeah, no 49-inch this year, unfortunately. There was a 49-inch
mhm.
950H last year, which was a great option.
And no
That'll still
45 inch. It starts at 65 inch. It doesn't even go below 65 inch this year.
no. So I don't know. I'm not really sure what they're doing, considering a few years ago they had like 5 options in 4K. So I don't know. It's interesting how they're again pushing us ahead. So I guess 65 is the new 55. I don't know.
This is a theme. You're not kidding, Brian, when you say the 77-inch OLED has a problem. So again, 77-inch color banding. Does the A90J handle gradients better? The answer is absolutely yes. Both Robert and John Riformato, Value Electronics in-house calibrator, they've never seen more consistently good uniformity across all TVs from the A90J than the A90J, right? So he's done so many hundreds of TVs in terms of calibration, and you could get lucky from one TV to the next. Some have banding, some don't. But consistently, it appears that the A90J, they do a good job of selecting and bending those panel for the Master Series. So if you're willing to pay the premium, you're not going to do better than the A90J in terms of guaranteeing that you're going to get good uniformity out of the box, especially the 65 or 83 inch if you're willing to pay that.
So apparently, what I'm hearing in my comment section, and I'm not as active on the forums, but apparently 65-inch A90s are having a lot of problems with banding.
The
So
65 inch, what's the problem? So this is important. What are you hearing in the
So I
other
mean,
stuff?
I got this today just from the forums guys that tell me that I don't stay on the forum. I'm too busy doing this with you guys. But the forums, apparently, there are lots of people talking about it. AVS forums about a lot of banding on the 65-inch.
Uh,
So
so is this color banding or the
they're
vertical
just
DS?
saying vertical banding. And I would say probably with the CX, I'm not sure if that's color gradation or just it's
Interesting.
having banding. So
So, so this is a problem with maybe the new Evo panel, assuming
it could
that
be.
the
And then
Evo
the
panel,
83, yeah, and the 83 inch isn't out yet. So it's hard to know the
man,
seven and
yeah,
in histories, and Robert and I have talked about this, that 55-inch historically has been the best panel uniformity. 65-inch has kind of always been a little worse, and 75-inch has been the worst. So always keep that in mind with screen uniformity. And yeah, the CX, I'm telling you, it really struggled this year with screen uniformity. I don't know if that's because of the manufacturing, of what's been going on, but I'd
mhm.
expect that to continue because these TVs were built during the worst possible time in our history. So
It was built remotely, right?
yeah, so I
Uh,
mean, we expect to see some issues this year.
so the dual cell in the US was announced to be 75 inches or larger. So we're not getting the 65, we're getting the larger one. I don't know exactly when it's coming. Apparently in
Why?
Canada, it's coming this summer, so it's also the large size. I think it's for pricing. They couldn't justify the premium price at 65, but at 75 they could. So we'll see how effective that is when it comes out.
So, FOMO, I know that you and I met over the H9G. Was that the Hisense? That's
The
kind of the
H9
TV that was it
Hisense,
the
yep.
Hisense that we met over. And this is a question for you guys too. Is I do know that TCL obviously and Hisense are trying to shed that value brand by offering this, and I would love to know what you guys think in the comments. Is it is still kind of looked down upon, even though they're offering so many more features than a lot of these higher end displays. I personally don't have any panel bias. They win my business every time. Every company has to. There is no Sony guy, Samsung guy, LG guy. But I am
Hmm.
curious because these are TVs that you have to buy sight unseen. And
Hmm.
that's fascinating because they're not in store anywhere. So I think it's an interesting topic because you have, I mean, they're nowhere and you're just buying them. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think it's a fascinating way they're approaching it. It's word of mouth and they're killing it.
It is word of mouth. Well, so it has to be. So the only way word of mouth works is if it's also a budget, right? So you combine quality with budget, it spreads like wildfire.
Yeah.
And TCL did that really well when they first started in the US. They were introduced to Amazon as the budget, like the cheapest TV you could buy on Amazon was the TCL back in 2012,
Yep.
2013, but it happened to be good. So they sold a decent TV for like $200, $300 back then. And they've been going up ever since. What people don't realize is that in China, Hisense considers itself a premium brand. So if you look at the Chinese version of those models, they got everything. They got chrome rims. They got this amazing stereo system. But in the U.S., they know who they are, right? They're not. They know they're more budget, and so they approach it that way. But the reality is, Hisense wants to enter into where Samsung is, and they're slowly
Yeah.
moving there. With a dual cell, it's their chance to do that. Bobby Jackson, thank you for your gift. I want to upgrade to an OLED from my plasma. YouTube TV looks great on my plasma. So, what OLED from last year or this year has the best processing upscaling for streaming services? Normally, when I hear upscaling, I say Sony. Whether it's A8H, you don't mention a gaming. A80H would be a great choice, depending on your size. You might even get the A9S if you go 48-inch. What is your favorite OLED processing, Brian?
I mean, I thought that LG caught up last year with the CX. I mean, their processing, their AI processing is right there. But for compared to what looks most like a plasma, if I'm going to go from plasma, I would go with a Sony just because the LG can be saturated and can clip, as you mentioned. So it depends on what your budget is, Bobby. I do like Sony coming from plasma specifically because if you're a plasma guy, you're going to need to stay OLED as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, I like the A8H especially. It's going to go down even lower. So keep an eye on that. And Sony does tend to keep their panels around, or the newer panels. But I think you'll see an upgrade with just about any OLED that you choose. But I would go with Sony.
Yep. So it is 4:34. How much long do I have you for, Brian? I don't hold you. I know it is the weekend. But
My family doesn't. My family doesn't care about me. They're just walking.
right,
Hello.
just a giant pillow flying in your face, right? And thank you all for joining us today. We love talking TVs. That's why we're here. Kevin C., thank you for your gift. Do I purchasing an LG G177-inch without calibration for 4,300 or the C177-inch with value
Oh,
electronics
that's a good question.
calibration for 4,400? Wow. Okay.
Wow, that's a
So,
great question.
okay, I'll start. I'll let you finish because I know you meet with Robert a lot.
Mhm.
For me, the value is the QC. 77-inch is a bear to return. And if you're buying sight unseen remotely, there's something to be said about making sure you have the best TV possible. Now, the problem is the C1 isn't the same panel as the G1. So I don't know which one's going to give you more batting issues. But Value Electronics will spend all day looking for a good TV for you at least. And with the G1, you're on the panel lottery on your own. So I go with the C1, but the fact that 77-inch, I don't know, doesn't look promising. He's going to have batting issues. What do you think?
You gotta go G1.
Ah, there you go.
You gotta go G.
Go big or go home.
I'm always conflicted with calibration myself. I think the TVs are excellent now as far as we can set them the way we like. Um, yes, the QC is definitely worth, to me, the QC is worth more than the calibration.
I
For
agree. And
me,
maybe
it's
compromise.
worth more. But for me, I mean, I'm going G1 just because I do think it's going to be a better panel. I think you're going to see a more rich color. And to me, the little bit of peak brightness is going to be worth it. So if you were asking me between an 83-inch C1 and a G1, then that would be a different conversation. But at the same size, I would have to go G1. As much as I love Robert and want to hook him up, I would go G1 if you can.
And generally, size does make a big difference in terms of if you're not too bright, right? Moderately lit room, that bigger TV does create immersion, especially if it's two OLEDs, a smaller, brighter OLED, a larger, slightly dimmer OLED. I'd go with a larger one as well because the dark room is a great equalizer. So that leads to this question, which is very similar. Go up to the 77-inch or stay with 65. He's 10 feet back, and he's looking to upgrade with the LG G1. Well, 10 feet back, I think you're going to go 77-inch. I think that's a bit far for 65.
And this is going to sound ridiculous, guys, but it's important, is the difference between 75 and 77 is staggering.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a 75-inch 900E. I moved it over. I put my 77-inch because you have to keep in mind, we all get hung up on diagonal. You have to go height and width. It's a big jump. 65, that is, for me, that's way too far away. I mean, then again, the reason why I'm dark-skinned is because my face is right next to a 77-inch TV. So I sit close. I would try to be, again, for immersion, go as large as you can.
So this is an interesting question. Now, if I understand correctly, the 92 and 93 are just different sizes of the X90. I'm going to have to ask Robert about this because I don't know how those things are separated, honestly. I don't know how, because I know one of them is actually a carryover from the X900H. It's literally an X900H, but just larger.
Mhm.
Whereas the other one is the X90J with the XR chip. So one of them does not have the XR chip. And maybe that's the one that has the lower contrast booster.
Okay.
But I have to talk to Robert and I'll look through the slides because in the slides we kind of separated the two. So I'll let you know later, Bogdan. Thank you for that difficult question.
And it's hard with the different letter changes. And I remember even, I want to say it was the Q8FN in Samsung. It had a different panel than the American version. So it's always hard for us to speak on different variants in different regions. At times, they can be a completely different TV.
OLED is a decade old. Yeah, it's just over 8 years old. This is the year we'll undercut LED by the end of the year. And so we're talking flagship LED, obviously, right? We're not talking like a TCL. So TCL has always been cheap. The question is, will the LG A1 selling just above 1,000, and the Vizio OLED last year is now under 1,000, the 55-inch. OLED is becoming mainstream for sure. And I think people will like the OLED because if it's shown in a dark room, it'll look great. But then at Costco, I have to say it's hard to tell the difference between an OLED and a super bright Q80T that they have on display. I really had a hard time seeing which one was which because the content, I don't know what the quality of the content is, but it's really bright at Costco. So I don't know if you can sell a cheaper OLED at Costco any better if it doesn't do something special with its brightness. While you go Costco shopping, what is it you see from OLED versus non-OLED?
What's crazy is I can't even do videos at Costco because all they have now is the Q80T, which is spelled Q8DT. And that's how their little, they have the 900H, which is great, and they have OLEDs. There is no more Vizio Quantum XP series Costco. I have not seen the OLEDs there anymore for Vizio. And I'll tell you that room is extremely bright, and OLEDs still jump off the screen. To me, it's not even in a conversation. So, yes, it's an old tech. I totally agree with you. But a lot of what we've talked about today is how mini-LED has not pushed anything forward. It's pushed the needle back in some instances. So I know it's an older technology, but I almost miss LED technology from what the conversations we've been having. I'll go back to the Q9FN and go back to that. Other than the Q90A, the mini LEDs have not impressed me a whole lot. I mean, the Q900A did impress me, but it's $10,000. So OLEDs, to me, are making a strong push forward by being more affordable than ever and delivering little incremental upgrades with the G1 and then huge upgrades with the A90J. And it's just, to me, they're just sneaking in. And I thought they were going to be, done at some point, but they're doing great.
Ernie, thank you for this question. And this is a difficult question for you only because you're shopping 8K, you're doing the right thing, you're getting the largest size, 85-inch. The problem is that 8K every year, it's getting better and better because they have a lot of challenges in processing and efficiency. So if you get the 800T, which is last year's 8K model, if you hold on till next year, it's going to look better next year and the year after because, as Brian was saying, the upscaling, there's still a ways to go. It doesn't look great if you're upscaling 1080p on an 85-inch, but maybe next year it will look better. So if your budget is what it is, Samsung gives you the best selection of 8K. Now, you mentioned that last year's NanoCell 99 maybe should be in consideration. If the NanoCell 99 85-inch costs the same as the 800T, it sounds like you'd probably go with the NanoCell 99.
Well, unfortunately, the NanoCell peaked out at 75 last year, which makes no sense because they've been selling 86-inch TVs at BJ's for 10 years. And Ernie, as far as like the 800T and the 900T, I thought they were excellent LEDs. The 900A is excellent as well. If you are looking at the 800T, Samsung historically also continues to drop in price. So the reason I'm guessing you're looking at that panel is it is fallen in price versus where it started. So I can easily say to you, wait till next year, but that puts us at another budget platform. So if you're looking at the 800T because it's a better value for you, it is a good panel. It's excellent. So is the 900 and 950 TS, is why I'm guessing FOMO that. My point is when people ask us these questions, a lot of times wait till next year. You're then starting the whole process over again and you're buying that TV at its peak.
Yep.
It's an excellent panel. It's worth picking up, especially at its current price, and maybe hang back another month. It's going to drop a little more.
So the best time to pick up last year's panel is always Prime Day. That's when they have their last super discount push before everything runs out. The good news is 85 inches tend not to run out, but Samsung, their large TVs run out quicker than others. Like the Sonys hang around forever, right? But some of the Samsung TVs from last year, when they do their promotions on Prime Day, within a month, they're gone. So I'd say wait close to Prime Day, see what the prices are, because your budget is as it is. There are not a lot of options in the 8K size, unless you're willing to go with the 8K OD Zero. 85-inch OD Zero from TCL is expected to be under $4,000. So if that's within your budget, that may be worth waiting for. It's coming out in Q3, but if you don't trust TCL, then that is probably the best option is what you have right now, the 800T.
And I know we're all good buying TCLs and Hisense without seeing them at $700 or at $1,000. Buying an 8K 85-inch TV and not seeing it is super trust, because trust me, as good as Amazon is, they get very different with picking up things that cost 200 pounds. I know because I've done it. They're less understanding about picking up 75-inch TVs and 85-inch TVs. So you have to still be very careful. So it's a big, big leap of faith. And as he said about bringing back a 77-inch TV, 85-inch is a monster. And TCL is not known for great screen uniformity. So it's and then guys, even our Prime days that historically this year is going to be different. Samsung still has all of their Q90s are all on the wall. They have no new panels as of 2 days ago. They're usually first.
Mm-hmm.
And last year the X950H, it's March. I had it in February, and we're already months behind. So this year is going to be interesting. So a lot of what we're talking about, that logic doesn't always play. At least I'm not sure if it's going to this year. So it's a tough year to buy, I think.
Agreed. And I love what Panasonic's doing. I agree with you, Jit Patel, which is they stripped out all the fluff and just preserved the awesome panel. And they used to do that with plasma. Remember when they had no audio and you just got the panel and stuck it into your own
The
AVR?
monitors.
They haven't done that
I wish
since
they did that.
plasma. Yeah, and this is exactly what Sony could have done. They could have stripped out the acoustic glass, all that stuff,
Yeah.
and maybe saved $800. People would buy it
Well,
because
and the
yeah.
Hollywood model we were talking about, FOMO, the one that was in Value Electronics,
Mhm.
that model is just a monitor, which is funny because I can't do head-to-head comparisons on it because it doesn't have any smart features. I can't put YouTube on it
Oh,
unless I go
I
through.
didn't know it was monitor only. Oh, that's interesting. Cool.
It's
All
just a
right.
Hollywood grade monitor, and it edged out the A90J. It's Hollywood reference. It's like that Sony monitor that we always talk about. Um, it it still was the cleanest, most accurate image I probably have ever seen. I mean, it was amazing, but it was super expensive. It was small, and they're gone, and they don't even know if we'll get them back. So, and one thing about Panasonic, I have to say, is we want Panasonic to come back, but we have to. The analogy I use for this is Panasonic has so many other products. It reminds me of like an F1 racing team like Mercedes, or they don't make any money off of those, those kart racing teams that these beautiful car companies have. Panasonic's not making money on TVs, so it's kind of a labor of love for them. This is what I hear. So they sell all kinds of other products that we're not even aware of. So we want them to come back, and I think they're looking at it going, "What for?"
Yeah. So this is a good question by Bobby Jackson. Thank you. As far as budget, 55-inch A90J, but value. So A8H or A80J. So it goes back to what we talked about. OLEDs have come to a point where the real differences between the newest OLED and last year's OLED, short of the A90J because it has the heatsink, A8H to A80J, I don't expect it to be a huge difference unless you want gaming and the A80J is promising VRR at some point. The A8H doesn't even have that promise. So there's that. And so I think you're paying for that promise of VRR. But if that's not important to you, I'd go with the A8H if I can get a good deal on it.
Yeah,
What are
and
your
I
thoughts?
would, and Bobby, I'd wait, give it 2 weeks because we're going to see the A80J very shortly. Um, and again, if you're a HDMI 2.1 from me really doesn't add anything to the movie image or streaming quality. But if you do want a game on it, you do want 4K 120, it's worth paying more for the A80J to have those, at least even have HDMI 2.1 functionality. But if you want a pure streaming panel that's going to be beautiful, the A8H is excellent. Also, its BFI, its clear feature is better than the A9G. It only goes down to like 1 peak nit of brightness. So that's an improvement over the A9G. But I would still wait to see because it's going to drop again once the A80J comes out. So if you can wait 2 or 3 weeks, I think you're going to end up getting a really, really affordable A8H or possibly an A80J. And the A80J is also going to offer a larger size that the A8H doesn't have.
Mm, agreed. Well, and this goes to what we were talking about before. So the Q70A, it's Edge Lit, it's this year's TV, and it looks great. And this is in a vacuum. So oftentimes reviewers like myself, and you do this as well, we have TVs head to head and suddenly you see the differences. But if that TV sat by itself and you have no other context other than maybe a 5-year-old, 6-year-old TV, yeah, today's Q70A is better than a 6-year-old TV, unless it's one of the magic Sony models, Master Series, the last one with a master backlight drive, right? But short of a TV like that, the Q70A is still going to look better than a 5-year-old TV because at the budget level, they've really improved a lot. So we're talking the last 5% of performance is so expensive, and people don't realize that they're paying for that last 5%. And if you don't watch HDR and you're only watching SDR, it may be wasted. You may not be enjoying that last specular highlight that goes above 1,000 nits, right? And the 70A, its biggest shortcoming is it can't break. I don't have the 70A. We'll talk about the Edge Lit last year. The Edge Lit last year could not break 500 nits. And so to me, that's cutting back on HDR. But if you watch SDR, it shouldn't be a problem. And I had the problem with the H8G. It just didn't pop with specular highlights, but it was a great looking TV. But I know what HDR is supposed to look like. But if you don't know what HDR is supposed to look like and you don't care, Q70A works fine.
Well, and keep in mind, guys, Edge Lit TVs, then we get back into Edge Lit Bleed or Edge Lit Glow, which is, you can really only see it at home. And I've had it with the KS9000. That TV was $7,000, and it looked like flashlights were shooting from the bottom of the screen. So Edge Lit, there's a reason why it's gone. I don't think it was as noticeable without HDR. I don't think the panels really showed its issues, but just be mindful, Edge Lit TVs, especially with shipping, there is a higher rate of defects. You'll see it just if it's just black bars, and we get back into black bars being lit up. That wasn't due to blooming. That was due to edge lit underneath, which is why flashlighting was different than blooming. We don't talk about flashlighting anymore because the panels are full array, but just be mindful if you go edge lit.
And this is an interesting, it's a comment, but I think it's interesting because we're assuming the Q900A and the OD Zero, right, very similar panels, is going to be the best non-OLED. But I'd like to throw in there the QNED 99 may surprise everybody, only because we're hearing some good specs out of that. I haven't seen it personally, but maybe they'll bring something to the table. But because they're all so large, except for the Q900A, which does come in a 65-inch, we're talking 75, 85-inch TVs, so we may never see a head-to-head with these TVs, other than, well, now electronics. Once they have that, maybe you can tell us what happens, Brian.
Well, yeah, and
what
no one's talking about, and I do think it's a big deal, is Samsung still not having Dolby Vision TCL will. And don't forget the Z9J will. And the Z9J, just being a regular LED, might sneak back in because mini LED again, TCL again having their third year now. I would go, they've worked it out to, at least unless they're not using the same panel as you mentioned before. I would think that just be mindful of the Z9J, and if you want Dolby Vision, that's a whole nother conversation.
Yes, and I think that's a good point. Maybe the TCL OD Zero is the Dolby Vision version of the QN900A, right? Those are like fighting waves.
Yeah.
I put up this comment because I know how much you love 120, 4K 120, but he doesn't think so much. And he's a PS5 guy, so
yeah, he's been having. He's on my channel. I love him, but he's being really unfriendly in the comments during our live stream. I use 120 FPS every day, and I love it. On COD, I use it in Halo Master Chief Collection on the LG CX. It's, I appreciate your thoughts, but I love it. I can't go without it. That's how much I like it. And having a PC, as you do, FOMO, I need it. So yes. I know it's easy to just discount it, especially with PS5 now. I'm hearing, well, don't worry, Sony's is, relying on PS5 owners. That is very short-sighted. The PC community is enormous. The Xbox community is enormous, and many of us have them all. So yes, I agree they play nice with each other, but PC gaming, as we all know, I have 100 games upstairs that I can run 4K 120. So I know there's only so many on the console, but if you're a console gamer only, great. But many of us are already using 4K 120. We said Dolby Vision wouldn't be an issue. Here it is. Xbox is pushing it. So you can like whatever console you like or be a fan of whatever TV you like, but don't think it's not important. 4K 120 is something I use every single day. Every night I play Call of Duty, I love it. So that's just my sense. But, to me, it's something that if you can have it, and the picture quality is the same, if not better in some ways, I don't know why we would just discount it and get rid of it.
And Rick Vald, H9G is my favorite TV of 2020, even if it's only under $1,000. I compared it with OLEDs, my OLEDs, and the 900TS, and I found the Hisense for under $1,000 to be untouchable at that price. Now, you have two issues. Motion is not the greatest, and it has that red motion blur if you watch certain HDR movies. Let's get that out of the way, but what are your alternatives? You go with the TCL R635 for under $1,000. You have blooming and lifted blacks. You go with any Samsung under $1,000. It doesn't even come close. And so it comes down to, it's the Hisense quality control. Are you willing to do the whole panel lottery? Because if it passes uniformity and DSC, that it's a keeper. It's a great TV. My favorite TV of 2020 easily.
Well, in value, I mean, we don't talk enough about it. It's so important, but so for me, my TCL R635, and I do think the TCL especially, if you saw serious blooming on it, it was defective, because mine was surprisingly good. I had people bring back a few of them. The box is very thin. Mine came really beat up, but it was very good. But you're thinking about it, $700, under $1,000. Like my projector, you're so busy thinking, oh my God, this thing only cost this. It's the best feeling because you don't feel that sticker shock or, man, I'm so, you know what I mean? Like it almost, it's the opposite of buyer's remorse. You're just laughing that you're enjoying full array, you're enjoying HDR, you're enjoying, and your wife's not leaving you, you're happy. So it's, I mean, value is such an important part of what we all talk about.
So Chris and Nudie, this is a good question. The biggest difference, if you're gaming, JZ2000 comes out of the box with 4K 60 VRR working. 4K 120, they have to figure that out for whatever reason, but at least it's working out of the box. A90J, it's a promised future update. And Brian and I do not like promised future updates. When you buy a TV, if it's not in it, you have to assume it may never come, and you have to be okay with it. If it comes, great. But if you bought the TV solely on the promise that it would get VRR, and it doesn't, that's a lot of grief for nothing. So I would take the JZ2000 because I game and I know it has VRR working. And I know that Panasonic is equivalent to Sony when it comes to color processing, color accuracy, and equally important, John Riformato, he prefers the Panasonic anyway. So, you can't go wrong with either one, but if you're gaming, you got to go with Panasonic.
Well, and keep in mind, guys, even with the C9, the C10, and now the C1, they still are struggling with handling VRR, right? So, for instance, the CX just took an update to try and help you mitigate shadow detail and change it because it raises the blacks at times. So, if LG is really still struggling with it, year 3, I cannot tell you that it will become that. It'll come anytime soon for either Panasonic. It's a nightmare. And the chips that we've talked about, and my Denon still can't do 4K 120. That's why I bought it, because of the chips. So really buy knowing that you love it for what it is right now. And if it comes to you, fantastic. But there's a lot of people on the forums, the Samsung Q90R does not have eARC. It was promised. It is never coming. And I have to do a video on that. We should do something about that to help that come back.
I have the Q90R. I'm not happy. So
and I've never really used eARC until recently. I would die without it. I need it. So
here's something that people should also be kind of pissed about. So I have the 900TS. That's their 8K flagship from last year. That has eARC out of the box, but it keeps on dropping signal. I think it only works with the Samsung soundbars or something.
That's like the PS5 and the Sony. They were great together.
I put the Sony soundbars, like a $600 soundbar I picked up, and it is definitely a codec problem because when I watch The Witcher, and it's on lossless and it's getting Dolby Atmos, at the exact same timestamp, it drops the signal every single time.
Oh, wow. It's got to be something.
Yeah, I convert it to regular ARC. Oh, no, it works fine. And then it goes to eARC. It's that same scene. So I know there's an issue with how it's decoding Atmos. This is on the Samsung or the Sony and Samsung interplay or Sony, I don't know which, but the experience is not good. So, but it works fine on the H9G. But H9G didn't have eARC. So now
but it's a lot like the 900H conversation we've had. I hate to keep bringing it up, but the 900H, if you look at it at a value and it has HDMI 2.1, it can do 4K 120. It is an absolute steal. Mm-hmm. The crime, though, is it's been out for nearly a year, and people spent that money on it a year ago, and it still doesn't have that feature. Now it may be next winter. We just got into spring, and if I made that choice my point is, if you bought it based on value and its picture quality and its feature set, then it's a bargain. But if you bought it based on what never never comes, that's a crime. It's terrible that you're not going to have that. So my advice to you is buy for what it does right now. Even your 8K panels, buy them as 4K panels that are the highest end, because there is no 8K content just yet.
And to add to that, not to be an alarmist and not to be a fearmonger, but the March 12th video that I talked about earlier, where they said winter 2021, after I put out my video, they took that video off. It is now private. They replaced it with a different video, and the new video has no mention of VRR.
See the old one. Yeah.
There is no. If you watch the video, you're like, there's no gaming feature. They go on about XR and all the wonderful things, saturation and upscaling. But the gaming section, and they even changed actors, right? They wanted to make sure they started fresh. So maybe it's
like, don't forget that guy. That is terrible.
So the March 16th Sony promotion of the XR chip, no gaming feature. Now, again, maybe it's legal saying, look, guys, people are talking about it. Let's just not even talk about it at all. Better nothing is said, which I understand, right? So Spillage Village, thank you for that. Google TV, I have the Google TV plugin from Google. I like it a lot. I don't know if the TV's implementation is identical. If it is, it's definitely an upgrade. I know Caleb loves it, right? He prefers the Google TV over the new WebOS 6.0 because the WebOS 6.0 has just way too many submenus and you get lost in that. The Google TV, yeah, right. And the Google TV, well, this is what Google does. They've spent so many years, they put so much money into user interface, and they finally worked it out with the Google TV. So you're benefiting from Google, whereas LG, man, this is a conglomerate that does 100 different things. So if the UI isn't perfect, I would choose Google TV based on my experience on my Google TV Chromecast plugin. So I'm hoping the Sony is just as good.
What's funny about the LG is, there's a lot of stuff going on when it says, hey, you want to close those apps? Like it asks you, do you want to put these to sleep? Because I get like your phone. I'm like, how many do I have open? 100 of them. I'm like, no wonder I'm getting input lag.
That's another mention is it's kind of slow. The menu system is kind of slow.
Yeah.
Christian Enriquez, thank you for your gift. What's your recommendation for a 75-inch TV for a medium to well-lit room? I'm planning to use it for movies and sports. The X950H, medium well-lit room, I would consider that. Great motion. Sports would be awesome. You have no ABL that you would normally get from an OLED. 75-inch size. I like the X950H. It's just in a dark room, it's not great, but if it's in a well-lit room, I think it's fine.
Yeah, I had the X950H. I thought it was great. It's just a continuation of what has come before it.
The 950G was great.
950G. I think the challenge with the 950H is, again, it was made as their flagship, and people didn't realize it was their flagship because of the 900H. So it was really in a weird spot. I fully can recommend it. I think it's an excellent panel. It's very bright. It's got Dolby Vision. I like its features. Its game mode is gorgeous. So I would recommend it. It's because it's also a safe bet right now, and I can't really recommend where we are with these mini LEDs, OLEDs right now, or the mini LEDs. It just is a great TV, and it's just very simple in its execution, and it just does what it says it's going to do.
I believe the number one complaint with the 950H over the 950G, ironically, was the adding of the extra wide viewing angle. It lost a bit of contrast. It lost some color volume. So people were saying, get the 950G if you don't have a specific need for the extra wide viewing angle, because it's a touch brighter, a touch better color volume. And that was the number one complaint. Everything else is identical to the 950G. So unfortunately, 950G is no longer for sale, but that was something that people didn't know when they got to 950H. You go, wait, why is it slightly lower contrast? It's because of that extra wide viewing angle. And Sony,
which I hope just go away. I don't want that feature anymore. I just don't know why they're putting it. Okay.
All right. We are at 2 hour mark. It's 5 o'clock. How about we wrap it up in the next 5 minutes? How's that sound? I don't want to hold you too long.
We go all day.
Your wife will be like, you're no longer allowed to talk your FOMO. Weekends is for family.
You can tell we're married, though, that we're actually available on a Saturday night.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, exactly right. Especially during these lockdown days.
Well, I mean,
Okay.
what I do want to talk about really quick, though, is the reason we were talking about this is, again, being an LED person at heart, it hurts me that I can't really recommend them as I used to. It was always the promise of HDR, that my first HDR TV, and seeing the fire and the explosions, I really wanted to follow that high peak brightness dream. But now the TVs aren't as bright as they were. The contrast ratio is lower than it was. It's just making it very hard for us to really recommend them the same way. And that's kind of why we started this conversation, is that they're going down, and even the 8K one's contrast ratio. So I just don't know where their place is. That's just,
And maybe the noise is coming from a new microphone, Ryan. So I apologize. I'm going to go back to the Electro Voice microphone. I was just trying something new with a binaural that's not working out at all.
It sounds cool. It sounds cool. Binaural sounds great.
I know, it sounds great, right? But then it comes down to the basics. Bravia Core. So I believe because the Bravia Core is supposed to be lossless visual. It needs to decode a lot more than the A8H can handle. I think you need the XR chip to do that. So that's why. So Bravia Core is a high bitrate movie experience where it's supposed to be as close as you can get to a Blu-ray, 4K Blu-ray HDR. No other streaming service is going to come close, but that means you need an updated processor for that, apparently. So, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they'll update it with a firmware, but I don't think so. It's to get you to buy the Sony A80J. Otherwise, why would you buy it, right?
And part of what we're all talking about is the TVs haven't improved in some ways to a few years ago. They have to give you reasons to buy.
Last question, and then we're going to close it down. Thank you, Safe Space Invader. Is Space Invasion ever safe? C9, C10, C1. I have the C9 for gaming and love it. Worth upgrading. We just talked about this. Oh, we love this question. So I'll start and I'll let Brian close out and then we'll head home. The answer is no. The C9 is a brighter TV than the C10. We all know that. It's got HDMI 2.1. It has VRR working, right? And the C1 at most will be as bright, but it's not going to be that much brighter. The biggest complaint is C10 got dimmer than the C9. And a lot of people consider the C9 a collector's item. So you got yourself a great TV. Not worth upgrading to an A90J unless you're looking for HDR. But a lot of people are like, well, if the C9 works for you, hold on to it. And I'm with that same sentiment.
Yeah. Other than, again, going up in size, if you have a 55-inch C9 and you want a larger panel, absolutely. The immersion you're going to get from that display, but that's the only reason to upgrade. I mean, I personally thought that the C8 and the B8 were brighter. So
that's crazy.
I would stay with your C9 again. But if you want to go up in size, yes. But do not upgrade for any other reason. There's just no reason to. The new processor, again, and I'll have to say this, processors, as we mentioned with that last Bravia feature, yes, they will let you do some things due to how they're programmed, but I don't buy into processing. They keep changing. The marketing must be amazing. Oh, we're going to do Extreme 2, 7. Don't get caught up in the processing. Enjoy your C9 unless you're going up in size.
Yep, agreed. And with that question, we are closing out. And thank you for coming, everyone. And thank you, Brian, once again. This is Brian's time. He's not getting paid to be here. He's here because he loves you guys. And he's the only one I can think of that would spend 2 hours with me on a Saturday talking TVs, right? So thank you all. And maybe not we'll see you next week, but we'll try to make it regular when we can. But
we'll keep running it.
We'll keep running when we can because a lot of things are happening this year. Surprise, sometimes good, sometimes bad. I promise my microphone will be back next week. Okay, until next time, stop the FOMO.
All right, take care, guys.